Welcome to this Dynamic Boards NED Community Meetup. Our topic for today is interviewing for new NEDs and chairs. And our speaker today is Joëlle Warren MBE, a truly distinguished voice in boardroom excellence, diversity and governance. Joëlle brings a rare combination of insight. She spent 25 years on the other side of the boardroom table as founder and former executive chair of Warren Partners, the purpose-led and now employee-owned executive search firm. That gave her an unparalleled understanding of what great non-executive leadership looks like. Then her own NED portfolio is equally impressive. So Joëlle currently serves as chair of the NCT, many of you know, I've used it myself, the National Childbirth Trust, one of the UK's best known charities. She sits as a non-exec director on a hospitality group of companies, and she's also a trustee of a local youth charity and lay canon of Chester Cathedral. She was the founding chair of Cheshire's first community foundation, helping to establish a lasting and legacy of philanthropic infrastructure in the region. So beyond the boardroom, Joëlle has served as Vice Lord Lieutenant of Cheshire and has previously sat on nominations and governance committees for the Manchester Metropolitan University. She's been a deputy chair of the North West Business Leadership Team, where she established both the Rising Stars and Diversity Drivers programmes, initiatives that have helped accelerate the careers of the next generation of diverse leaders. Her influence extends to national policy too, having worked with the BEIS, the Hampton-Alexander Review and the Parker Review to advance leadership diversity beyond the FTSE 350. Joëlle began her career with Lloyds Banking Group, and her MBE reflects the extraordinary breadth of her contribution to business and community life. What an accolade of all those experiences. I met Joëlle over 8 years ago. She's been a great supporter of me and of Dynamic Boards. And Joëlle, I'm just delighted that you said yes to speaking with us today. Thank you, and over to you.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. I'm a big fan of Sarah's too, so we're having a mutual fan club. But I want to talk today in threes. I think in threes, actually, and I want to talk to you about three lots of three today. So around this whole thing about interviewing chairs and NEDs. And the first three is before, during and after the interview, because it's all very well talking about the interview itself, but if you get the before and after bit wrong, it doesn't work. So before, what should you be thinking about when you're thinking about a new NED or indeed a chair? I suppose the first thing is around the NOMCO, the nominations committee, and I'd be saying to all of you, why not be on it? I think it tends to be the chair and the chief exec and quite often the SID, but I think there's a good place there for NEDs, regardless of whether you're holding those roles, and it's quite good experience. So the NOMCO really has to agree what are the skills you're looking for this particular role. We tend to just roll out, oh, this is what we're looking for in a NED, but you will lose some skills as if somebody's left, but you don't necessarily just want to replicate them. Priorities may have changed. You need to look at your skills and your diversity audit to say, are the needs different? So start with that. And then I'm a big fan of getting buy-in from the whole board to the key qualifiers and to the process. You don't want to have to be in a situation where you get to the end of it and it does need board approval and you find that people are thinking, oh, well, I didn't agree with it in the first place. So spend the time up front and get that sort of approval. And then think through about how are we going to increase the pool and the diversity of the candidates we've got. So that can be from the candidate pack or whatever it is. At Warren Partners, we would do a candidate brief. We love to include there quite a personal letter from the chair, or in the case of the chair, the SID or somebody else, because that almost speaks to the people about what is it you're looking for this appointment and what could make it exciting for you to consider it. Have a think about the time demands, and that's something you're going to need to look at through as you look at applicants and as you look at the interview, whether they've got the capacity for it. And also the process. I think it's great in the candidate pack to outline what that is so people know what to expect. I think it's great if you can give an opportunity to talk to or even visit before you have to apply. So that's the before. The during bit, I suppose, is where we start diverging from an exec interview. And this is where I think people sometimes get it wrong. The role of the non-exec is different from the role of the exec. And so the interview needs to be different. I think it needs to be much more conversational. And so if we say, well, the exec is responsible for day-to-day management, they're responsible for doing, and the NEDs are responsible for sort of the strategic oversight, the governance. And so you need to steer it differently. In a way, if you are doing, you need to make sure they can do. Where if you're responsible for strategic oversight, you need to make sure they can think. And you need to make sure that they can build relationships. I believe that the ability to ask great questions in the right way, let me repeat that, the ability to ask great questions in the right way is the key part of being a NED. And so you need to let them demonstrate it. And when I coach candidates to prepare them for a NED interview, I get them to try to turn an interrogation, which is often what you see in NED interviews or exec interviews, into a conversation. And so I'll be saying to them, well, they may have asked you this question, but how could you turn that back into a question to them? Because that's what they need to know, that you can ask great questions in the right way. So that you get into a real conversation. And then I suppose there are some obvious questions which you have to do, and it's okay to start with those to warm them up. So things like, what's piqued your interest in this? What are you bringing to our board at this time? Or what do you think makes a good NED or chair? And probably for a chair, how do you develop a good working relationship with the CEO? But you do need to get into a more strategic discussion. So, what are your views on the future of the industry? That shows their thinking. What do you like about our strategic direction? That would show that they've done some homework. And perhaps what concerns you? That would show their ability to challenge and also how they do it. I want to tell you a little story about a building society that will remain nameless, where I was doing a whole day in London of non-exec interviews. I'd come down from Cheshire, which is where I live, and on the way there, I'd noticed that the building society had put out an RNS, a Reuters news thing, to say that their CEO was going. Nothing in there at all about why he was going, and it was totally unexpected. So the first thing I do is I'm WhatsApping the chair and saying, what the heck's happening? What am I going to say to all these candidates who are going to ask me about it? So I started with candidate number one and got to the end of the interview. They hadn't asked me anything about it. So I thought, okay, I only spotted it this morning because I was on the train. Give them a break. Had you seen the RNS? No, they hadn't seen it. And so we talked it through. It was when we got to a candidate who said, oh, yeah, I've seen it, but I thought it might be a bit awkward to mention it. I just said, no, they're not progressing. Because if they can't ask the right questions and have the courage to ask the tricky questions, then we've got a problem. And I think that's what's caused some of the problems in boards in the past. And then I suppose you allow time for questions. But if you've got a conversation going, which is what you're aiming to do, You'll probably find there aren't many by the end, and that's absolutely great. But hopefully you've created that kind of atmosphere where you can have that good conversation. By the way, you don't have good conversations having one person sitting on one side of a table and 5 sitting on the other. So really think about how many are in the room, how the room's set up, how they're welcomed in, and how you just how you greet them. I mean, we do things like, who's going to be the first to go and pick them up, and so you can have a little chat as you're doing that. And then afterward, do put yourself in their shoes. About timing, manage the times. If you said you're going to get back to them on Friday and you can't, then just let them know. I'm really sorry, we're not going to get back to you today. But they're going to be spending that whole weekend thinking, what the flip's happened? So just think about them. You're building a relationship here, and the relationship starts way back before you know whether you want them or not. Let them know that, taking references might take time, getting out a letter of appointment might take time, and do keep in touch before they actually start. So, think through that induction, think through the buddy system afterwards. That's the before, during, and after. I'm then going to switch to my next three, which is character, capability, and chemistry. I use these 3 in executive recruitment too, but let's have a little bit of a think about each of them. Where are you going to get evidence about their character? So this is about assessing for values, and we're beyond an example of give me an example of a situation when, by the way, folks. But you do need to get evidence. So let me give you the hospitality group I sit in. Our values are passionate, collaborative, considerate, and bold. And so some of those, you don't need to ask questions. Give me an example of a situation when you've been passionate. You know about, you can see it, you can feel it, or, collaborative. You might need to probe a little bit more, how did you work with another group in that situation or whatever? But I think I'm not a great fan of big structured interviews. I think knowing what you've got to cover and having a tick list, have I done that? So I tend to write the values on the thing I'm taking the notes on, and just sort of going, yes, I've got evidence of that, or question mark, a tick across or a question mark as I go along. And don't forget the role of references, not just written references, but input from your colleagues and any interaction, so the PA who's made the appointment, the receptionist who's greeted them, the CEO who may have had a pre-meeting with them. Get all of that, and it's all great evidence to character. And then competence. So, I said about how the role of the NED and the role of the executive is different. All board members have to be into sort of strategy, leadership, culture, but NEDs have extra ones. So around risk and succession planning and remuneration and scrutiny of performance and constructive challenge and stakeholder and shareholder engagement and oversight of ESG issues. Those used to be all detailed beautifully in the Corporate Governance Code. They aren't anymore, but it is when I'm going through, when I was going through non-exec CVs and chair CVs, I'd just be seeing, have we got evidence? Is the word risk mentioned? Are they showing some sort of shareholder engagement or stakeholder engagement? Have they been on a remuneration committee? Because these things come to the board. And even if you haven't been an HR director, then if you've got experience of remuneration, it's good to be able to tick some of these off before you get to interview. And then chemistry. And I think this is where when I ask staff or board members to describe their boards, they almost never talk about how much they knew about corporate law or how good they'd be at an AGM or how they understood the governing documents. What they talk about is how they feel about their interactions with people. So you can be brilliant technically, but if you can't communicate with people, you might just as well not know anything. So it all comes down to relationships, which is why it's so important to assess for chemistry. But without just recruiting in our own image. And I think that's where we have to be so careful. Oh, I like them, I'd fit well with them. That's not the grit in the oyster, is it, that makes the pearl? And the best boards do embrace sort of different experience, different thinking. So those are my first three: before, during, and after: character, chemistry, and capability. My final three is 3 people on 3 occasions doing 3 different things. So I can remember the days when a chair went out and had a conversation with someone in their network, someone like me, who turned up as a Ned on the board at the next board meeting, which is why I recommend these 3 rules. They need to be seen by at least 3 people. You know, you can do that in a panel, but it's best if it's done on 3 separate occasions. We all have good days, don't we? And we all have better days. And I think, you know, it's just good to give that sort of pause in our processes, so that we allow for that. And then doing 3 different things, because board meetings aren't all that non-execs and chairs do. They also stand up at AGMs, and they also analyse a lot of documents, and they also interact with your team, your executive team, and they also act as an ambassador. And so the panel interviews really only a part that I'd like a social interaction with the Neds, perhaps those who haven't been part of the panel, so they might see them differently, maybe even with the executive directors. I have used facilitating a discussion with a stakeholder group. That can be an interesting way of feeding in, but three different occasions, doing 3 different things with 3 different people minimum. I think that's my 10 minutes.
Thank you, Joëlle. You've given us lots to think about, and I'm sure that everyone listening to this is thinking, how does that apply to the experiences I've seen on my board? So thank you. Lots and lots of nuggets in that. I really appreciate you giving that talk, Joëlle. So we are going to jump into some questions that I have come up with Joëlle. We are looking at getting you thinking about what is your experience been in these areas. So the first one is, what's been missing from the processes you've been involved in? You know, you've sort of heard about the gold star experience with what Joëlle shared there. You know, have people just had one meeting and then one person and then appointed them? You know, having heard what Joëlle shared, what's missing from the ones you've seen? What creative ideas and approaches have your boards taken? I always think that's one of the best things about this NED community. We hear some ideas that you might never have done before from this group. So let's share those now. And lastly, how do you intend to influence the next process on your board? What are you going to do? Joëlle mentioned putting your name forwards to be on that nominations committee, but how do you think you could help influence that? We're going to take 3 minutes of silence to give you a chance to just think independently about these questions before we jump into breakout rooms.